We're here with our friend, Julie Kelly, an expert on so many things, a fantastic reporter as well. January 6th, absolutely nobody better. Julie Kelly, how are you, my friend?
Great, Mark. Thanks so much for having me on. So good to hear your voice.
It's a pleasure, likewise. So what happened today with the Inspector General of the Department of Injustice and so forth?
So, Mark, you are familiar with Michael Horowitz, the longtime Obama-appointed DOJ Inspector General. Mm-hmm. He has done some good work, but look, let's face it, he's a company man, and he has delayed the release of this report, which we've all been waiting for, that was supposed to disclose the activity of FBI informants, undercover agents, assets, etc. on January 6th. Now, after nearly 4 years, he comes up with an 88-page report, very thin, and gives a few crumbs, allegedly says that there were only 26 confidential human sources, also known as informants, at the Capitol on January 6th. People who I talk to who are very familiar with the court proceedings in Washington say there's no way that that number is accurate. Nonetheless, Michael Horowitz also threw out a little chum for regime reporters saying that there's no evidence of FBI undercover employees. As you know, Mark, that's totally different than informants. But that is the narrative then that the regime media is running with. Nonetheless, this is not in any way full disclosure of FBI assets involved before and on January 6th, and I assume our friend Kash Patel will give us a much more accurate account of the FBI's involvement on January 6th.
You're right. I looked at this. It's thin, 88 pages. Oh, we looked through 50,000 documents and videos and all the rest of it, and you're exactly right, being an old justice guy, to say we employees, that's a dead giveaway there. The FBI doesn't send employees into these operations. It sends third parties into these operations. They pay them, they're undercover, and so forth and so on. And you're right, they barely touch the surface of this. 88 pages. I mean, we could have written this in our sleep, quite frankly. He didn't get to the bottom of very much, did he?
He didn't, Mark, and I'm disappointed. I expected a little bit better from Horowitz here because in 2019, he released a pretty scathing report, an investigation into the FBI's confidential human source program, one that, by the way, costs us about $45 million a year. He was very critical of how the FBI handles, especially longtime sources, how they pay them cash, how there's no oversight of these informants. And so I really thought maybe he would do a better job here. 88 pages, mostly filler, talking about DOJ guidance related to the use of informants. He relied on transcribed interviews from the J6 committee. Why didn't you conduct your own interviews? But I'll tell you who didn't sit for an interview, Mark, and that is FBI Director Christopher Wray. Now, why didn't Chris Wray sit with the DOJ Inspector General, who's trying to get to the bottom of what Chris Wray himself calls a domestic terror attack, refuses to sit with him? So did his former deputy, David Bowdwich. He sat for an interview with the J6 committee, but didn't talk to the Inspector General of the DOJ. Very interesting.
And what did he say about the National Guard?
Right. Nothing about the National Guard.
Not a word.
But I'm glad you brought that up, Mark, because once again, the American people are supposed to believe that the FBI's intelligence and security failures on January 6th were just a mistake. It was confusion. It was a lack of chain of command, lack of communication, coordination. That's what Michael Horowitz wants us to believe in terms of why the FBI didn't have intelligence and do something in advance of January 6th. This all is a familiar pattern by these agencies. We can't certainly continue to believe that incompetence and confusion is why these very powerful federal agencies did not do more on January 6th.
It really was a CYA, the way I see it. Here's an example. Politico's or MSN.com's coverage. Horowitz stressed no sources were encouraged or authorized by the FBI to enter the Capitol or any restricted area, and stressed that they were not encouraged or authorized to commit any illegal acts. 88 pages. He really didn't provide substance for that. 23, the confidential human sources present on January 6th came to Washington to the Capitol on their own. Of that group, 3 entered the Capitol during the riot, and an additional 11 sources entered the restricted area around the Capitol. I don't understand. What is a confidential human source for the FBI? They just show up and volunteer, and all of a sudden, when they're done, they go to the FBI? Does that even make any sense to you?
Of course not. And Mark, you know from my coverage of the FBI's plot, the entrapment operation to allegedly kidnap and kill Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, that was a complete FBI entrapment operation from start to finish. Now, there were no documents or reports or forms between these FBI handling agents and more than a dozen informants who were involved. No. What the defense attorneys in that case uncovered were numerous, hundreds of text messages back and forth between the FBI handlers and their sources, telling them, instructing them what to do. Now, I saw this in court filings in the Whitmer case. I heard it in 2 federal trials. Are you telling me that Michael Horowitz saw all of the text communications between what we know FBI handlers from at least 14 field offices and all of their informants? Of course he didn't. So how is he making that judgment? It's impossible to believe that he even had access to those materials, let alone has a full accounting of the communications between FBI agents and their informants.
Very flimsy, really very unprofessional job. Why do you think he released it now when he did?
Well, I do think it precipitated Chris Wray's announcement yesterday that he was going to be stepping down. But I think Horowitz thinks that this is enough to keep his job because Donald Trump is the only person who could fire an inspector general. And Horowitz, he wants to stay exactly where he is.
Well, keep up your great work, Julie Kelly. She's on Substack, Declassified with Julie Kelly. I encourage you to keep track of Julie Kelly. Thank you, my friend, and God bless you. She's fantastic.